have been going through the Fifth Way series, and we had a discussion. Well, I guess it was a monologue. It wasn't a discussion. I was the only one talking. Last week we were discussing the idea of reclaiming your awareness, and that everything that Jesus is teaching us to do in his way is about reclaiming awareness, becoming aware again, aware of the reality around us in this world, that everything is one thing. The experiences that we've had that were non-dual instruct us, but we don't really know what they are, and we don't connect the dots afterwards and bring it down into our lives where it becomes an actual part of us. But this is what contemplation is all about. It's the intentional building and developing of our awareness so that it does become a part of our lives, to be able to see, even through all the diversity, all the physical needs and things that we need to do, the tasks, that there is this unity at the core that changes everything. And I wanted to build on that with the next. We're also going through 6 pairs of words. The first one was justice and mercy. The second one was I don't remember. See how I am? This one today is good and evil. And we've talked about good and evil before. But putting it into this context, I think, may change it a little bit for us. Jesus says, in fact, take a look at Matthew 7, starting at verse 1. Jesus says, "Do not judge, that you will not be judged. For in the way that you judge, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you." Now, we've heard this over and over again. We've talked about this before. But what I want to try to do is bring home the immensity of this statement. This statement is huge. But we won't see it that way if we just read it in English. We'll have an immediate idea of what we think this is about. But we had talked yesterday or last week about the Aramaic agreement, that you can't translate directly from one language to another word for word. It is not possible, because of the agreement that each people has that gives birth to their language. Each group of people with their culture has an unspoken agreement among them. It is the agreement of their culture, their worldview, their view of science, their view of geography, their view of everything. And that gives birth to the language. And the language then reflects that agreement. We're not translating from a language to a language. We're translating from agreement to agreement. And if we don't realize that, if we don't take into consideration the way that another culture views life, the idiomatic expressions that they have, and not just the meaning of the words and the syntax, we will not get the meaning. And so when we look at the phrase like this from English and an English point of view, we're going to miss the fact that Jesus is talking out of a specific context. And this context isn't lexical historical this time. This context is Jesus as a mystic, Jesus as a contemplative. And when you view him through the Aramaic lens, that's an inescapable truth, that he is a mystic and a contemplative, which simply means that he believes that he can have a direct experience of his Abba, of the Father, that he can be one-to-one with that presence to presence. That's what a mystic is. It's no more exotic than that, although that's pretty exotic. But it certainly isn't threatening like it is in so many denominations. Jesus is a mystic. Jesus is a contemplative. And that expands the meaning of what he's saying right here. Because what we're going to do is we're going to just slice off one possible meaning, one possible translation from this, and we're going to look at it as if he's saying, do not consciously condemn another person, right? Don't look down on them, don't condemn them, don't judge them for specific things that they do or specific things that they believe. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more when you look at Jesus as a mystic. What he's really pointing to here is the unconscious, automatic judging or objectifying of each and every moment that we do, because that's what our minds do. Our minds are geared, our minds are designed, right, to create separation, to understand and to become aware of ourselves as a separate entity from others with needs that may conflict with others. to separate foe from friend, from advantage to disadvantage, and carve out a means of survival for us. That's what our minds are designed to do. And they do it really well. But they do it constantly, 24/7. Your mind never stops. It is always running. It is always talking to you. It is always objectifying everything, creating a subject and an object. That is the kiss of death for the experience of presence. This actual non-dual, as we call it, experience of presence. As long as your mind is doing what minds do, you cannot have that experience. You will be outside the experience, looking at a picture in a frame, rather than being inside the living picture itself. Our minds create this perception of life and each moment and each event, judged and valued against our personal advantage or disadvantage, against our means of survival and the danger that may be present. But not only clear and present dangers are being processed by the mind. Unconscious triggers are also being processed by the mind. We could call them neuroses if you want. They're things that we fear that really don't exist except in our minds or in our past, which the mind is perceiving as being a clear threat right now, even though it really doesn't exist. This is what Jesus means when he says from the cross, "Forgive them, Father, they don't know what they're doing." Because those people who were murdering him at that moment were completely justified in their minds for doing so. The mocking, the spitting, the ridicule, everything, the cruelty that they were doing to him was justified in their minds because of what their minds were telling them, what the belief system that they had been taught all their lives and had been corrupted for 3 or 4 centuries before Jesus. They thought they were justified in doing what they were doing. And Jesus recognizes that. Even in the extremis, even from the cross, he still doesn't harbor the resentment or the bitterness or the vengeance. He realizes they don't even know what they're doing. This is what's happening in our minds. This unconscious judging that we do, this automatic objectifying that our minds do, colors every moment that we experience, objectifies all of life, creates subject and object. This is what Jesus is talking about. This causes everything that we experience to be placed into categories. We will call it good or we will call it bad. Against what? Against our agenda. Against what it is that we feel that we need to do in order to survive, in order to get the things that we want, to have the outcomes that we think we need. Everything becomes placed in a category, in a pigeonhole, labeled good or bad based on that. And we don't even realize that it's happening. This is what Jesus is talking about when he says, do not judge. Go beyond just the conscious condemnation, looking down at another person. Now you got to dig deep into the psyche, deep into your soul. What is it that is causing you to continue to put these labels on everything that you experience so that you're never really present to any of it at all? 1,000 years before Jesus, Solomon got it all together in the book of Ecclesiastes. Take a look at Ecclesiastes 3, starting at verse 1. This is that famous passage, a little poem inserted into the heart of Ecclesiastes. There is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. How many of you are hearing in your minds, turn, turn, turn? Of course, Birds made that famous. But for one of Ellen's great deviled eggs, who wrote that song? Anybody know who wrote that song? Ever heard the name Pete Seeger before? Pete Seeger in the 50s wrote the song, but everybody remembers it from the Birds, right? It had to be the Birds. Turn, turn, turn. 1,000 years before Jesus, Solomon is getting it right. What's he talking about here? He's talking about in every experience in our lives has its appointed time. Richard Rohr said that everything belongs in one of his books. Absolutely. Everything belongs. Everything has its appointed time. Everything can teach us. Everything can bring us further down the road. Everything can help us to reclaim our awareness if we let it. If we approach it as such. If we have reclaimed enough awareness to dig beneath the automatic categories that our mind will place things so that we can breathe and take a different choice, make a different choice, erase the categories and just lean into the experience. This is what Jesus is talking about here. This is what Solomon is trying to say. The acceptance of everything that occurs in our experience, in its appointed time, is the opposite of judging. See that? If we are accepting things as they unfold, as they roll out to us in real time, and realize that this is the time for this, whether it is painful or not, that's the opposite of judging. And it allows us to fully experience, fully embrace all of life, to reclaim our awareness more and more and more as we go. How everything fits, how everything belongs, how everything has its purpose. Again, if we will just allow it to be. It starts with noticing our initial thoughts that judge. And Jesus is talking about this all the time. You got to nip things in the bud. That first feeling of anger that you have towards your brother, he says, don't just think because you haven't killed him, you're not guilty before the court. That first thought makes you guilty. Because that's the first thought that has separated you. Notice that thought. Stop it right there. Take the breath right there. Before you take another breath in anger and resentment, stop it. Pull it back. To notice those initial thoughts that judge and categorize good and evil. That's what we're talking about here. Then we can start to see through the automatic judgments that we make all the way to the truth that will make us free, that Jesus is talking about. So let's step back for a second. What is this good and evil that we're always labeling and always categorizing things into? What does it really mean? Well, we know what it means to us here in the West, in our language, in our culture. We're talking about polar opposites, dualities. This is good, this is evil. They are diametrically opposed, and they're always in conflict with each other. And we imagine that battle going on everywhere. And we see it carried out in all of the dualisms that we experience in life. And they are dualisms in life. There's a unity at the core, but we get stuck at the surface of things. And we think of good and bad that way. But let's now step back into the Aramaic agreement and see if we can start to imagine it in a different way. I want to read a few paragraphs from the Fifth Way. And this first one is a little bit more of a creative writing spree that I went on. So just kind of close your eyes. See if you can imagine yourself in this space. It's not hard to imagine Yeshua as a small boy, spending uncounted hours in his father's carpentry shop, watching and helping, and eventually working there himself, possibly taking over his father's business before he set off on business of his own. See his little form perched safely out of harm's way as he watches the raw lumber come in and the slow, painstaking, even organic transformation taking place before his eyes with only the roughest of hand tools being applied. See his smiles as he begins to understand his father's patient intent. Parts of living trees becoming fine and finished additions to the homes of his friends and neighbors. The process is not quick, and each piece is a custom original, lovingly and skillfully coaxed out of the heart of the wood. Jesus was no son of a fast-paced urban merchant, but a rural craftsman embedded in the rhythm of agrarian life in the Galilee. These rhythms, this submission to and participation in the natural cycles of life all around, became part of Yeshua's vocabulary, a storehouse of images and stories on which he called to communicate word of his kingdom. These are the images that abound for us in the Gospels. Ordinary stories of ordinary people doing ordinary things. Yeshua speaks of widows and farmers and vineyards and wedding celebrations, of fishermen and servants, tax gatherers and sometimes kings, but always with the course of daily life that everyone recognized and experienced. The people of the first century Galilee, just like people living today in agrarian and subsistence cultures, were intimately connected with the rhythms of nature, of the turning of the globe, night and day, the circuit of moon through its phases, the slow progression of the seasons, the movement of wind and weather and wildlife. They lived close to the earth. They could hear its heartbeat and depended on its pulse for their very lives. To be in harmony with the land's rhythm was certainly good. It was critical to maintaining their lives. When to sow, when to reap, when to go out on the water, when to come in. A good crop was a ripe crop, white and ready for harvest, one that had been planted and carefully tended, completely in harmony with the season and the land. To be outside such harmony was not only bad, it could be disastrous when the success of a single crop could mean the difference between life and death. Yeshua tells the story of a farmer sowing seeds that fall on good soil and bad, on rocks in the beaten path. Though the deeper spiritual meaning of his parable had to be explained, everyone immediately and intimately understood the implications of seed being planted in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and of plants dying off before coming mature and ripe and ready. We as modern industrial people don't understand this anymore. We can spend years of our lives completely isolated from the rhythms of nature in hermetically sealed, air-conditioned cars and houses, never seeing a sunrise or a sunset, our bare feet never really touching the earth, even electrically isolated from the ground by rubber-soled shoes. We no longer see the quality of our lives being intimately tied to and depending upon moving in step with the beat of the earth's heart. So our understanding of good and evil are no longer based in concepts of harmony and timeliness. These words mean something else entirely, something as completely isolated from the rhythms of nature as we ourselves have become. For us, good and evil are moral terms dealing with the quality of interactions and behavior in human affairs, or qualities that meet or fail to meet certain moral or legal standards. They are terms that describe the intrinsic nature of a person as viewed against those standards by which that person is judged, acceptable, appropriate, desirable, or not. Languages reflect the cultures that create them. And so for us in the West, as the children of Greek philosophy and Roman law, good and evil are at root legal terms. We judge everything around us and each other according to the standards of law. And consequently, we feel judged ourselves according to those same standards. When Yeshua said, "Judge not, lest you be judged," he was saying exactly that. Not that God would someday judge us in retaliation for judging others, but that in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. If we judge another according to some standard in our minds, we have already judged ourselves. God has nothing to do with it. So, the reality that we believe is the reality that we endure. It's that simple. The standards that we believe are the standards that we must endure. Before we ever put them on another person, they're already ours. And before we ever can meet the presence of God, we have to break through all of those standards, all of those deeply unconscious even beliefs. And whatever standards we use, that is going to be our reality. Now you might be thinking, well, we got to judge stuff, don't we? Isn't that part of the gig? Yeah, but not judgment. Judgment is a conclusion we reach based on a preset standard in our minds. That we can do from across the parking lot. That we can do from half a world away. We can put judgments on people based on those standards. That's what we're not supposed to do. What we need to do and must do is discern. We need discernment. What's that? That's a conclusion we reach based on experience. When we've experienced something, now we can realize that's the intrinsic quality of this thing or this person. And we need to deal with that. But before we get to discernment, we've already been face to face. We've already been in some kind of relationship. We've already spent enough time to know what it is that we're discerning. That's the difference between the two. And that's what we have to keep coming back to over and over. Preset standards are those inherently legal and categorical internal rules that we use. We cannot see God's love, God's good news through that lens. We're only going to see the inside of our eyelids wherever we look, if that's as far as it goes. A legal point of view is always dualistic. It's always splitting things into two halves. And it's contingent, right? You have to do this in order to get that. When we are looking through a legal mindset, everything that we view is categorized as good or evil, acceptable or not, loved or not. We're going to see good and evil as those polar opposites, like light and dark, as we imagine. But the Aramaic agreement has a very different concept, different way of looking at this. And that's what that passage was trying to bring across to us. Because of their experience as an agrarian subsistence people, good was something that was ripe. So taba in Aramaic, good, means ripe. Able to preserve life. Same as the intent of the law. What was the law about? We said to preserve life and also to bring awareness of God's presence into every moment of our lives. If something is preserving life, it is taba. It is ripe. It is mature. It is ready. It's in the right place and the right time. It's in harmony. It's flowing seamlessly. And the word tobe that Jesus uses in the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, tobe, that is another root, word of the same root from taba. And it has that same sense of taba. Blessed are you, ripe are you, in harmony are you, fortunate are you, congratulations to you, right? If you're poor in spirit. That's the idea here. And conversely, bad, evil, bisha, means unripe. The opposite, of course. Unready, out of harmony, out of rhythm. But not in the sense that there is any judgment on that. It's just like an infant, a beautiful infant, is a bisha human, right? An unripe human. Not yet ready to do what humans are designed to do. Not yet ready to accept the fullness that a mature human would be able to do. That's that don't know what we're doing part. We can't blame the infant for what they don't know how to do yet. Same thing with people who are bisha. In Hebrew, the words are tov and ra, good and evil. But you could really translate those into functional or dysfunctional. One scholar does that, and that really helps us. Is something functional or is it dysfunctional? Not intrinsically or categorically or immutably evil, right? It's just a description of the function. Are you ready for prime time yet or not? It's looking at the effect of that state that we're in, but not casting judgment upon the person who just doesn't know yet what they're doing, right? So a good person is going to do good things, helpful things, decent things, things that are of advantage to everyone who is concerned. They're going to bring as much goodness to as many people, right, for as long a period of time, that utilitarian kind of idea. So a good person does good things in the sense that they function as right or lawful or moral, but importantly, not out of obedience. It's not just that they're obeying. Taba, a good person, is one who is ready. Ready to do what? Ready to see the goodness of true relationship. Ready to see the goodness in life. Ready to see the goodness in nature and every experience around them. And because that person sees this goodness, they will act to foster, to nurture, protect that goodness of life that they see. It flows out of them because they are ready to actually see the connection, see how we are all linked. We are all one. Now, is that a subtle difference between obedience and this flow that we're talking about? Well, you could say that, but it makes all the difference in the world. Good is not about behavior. Good, taba, is not about obedience. That is the byproduct of goodness. It is the effect of goodness. It's not about a standard. It's not about a code by which we then judge ourselves and our performance and that of others. It's about having matured. It's about having ripened. It's about having awakened, if you will, into someone who is in love with life, in love with unity, loves being one with everything and everyone, and lives and acts accordingly. It flows at the right place, at the right time. Such a person can't help but be in harmony with what Jesus calls kingdom. Kingdom is that state of being one with, that taba state. Conversely, bad and evil, an evil person or a bad person is not one who does bad things, but is incapable of seeing what is good. They just can't see it yet, you know? We can be really upset with our kids because they don't clean their bathroom, but they just don't see it. You walk in, you see the dirt. They walk in, it looks fine to them, you know? They're not broke, you don't fix it. This is the taba person, this is the bisha person. They are as yet too unformed or possibly too damaged on the other side to be able to see, to be able to practice oneness in the harmony of relationship. Just don't see it. Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That's literally true. A person who is bisha doesn't know what they're doing. They don't see. Okay, I'm going to date myself here. Who remembers Mr. Magoo? All right. If you don't know who Mr. Magoo is, he was a cartoon character back in the 60s or whatever. Jim Backus did this great voice for him. Anyway, he was so nearsighted, he was probably legally blind, and he didn't wear glasses, and he would just walk through life blithely, and completely oblivious to all the disaster that was happening behind him. So he would walk through a scene, and he'd be pristine on the other side, and then everybody would be picking up the pieces. Girders were falling, and things were all gone, That's the bisha person. They don't even realize it. They're just walking through life. And if you're in their blast zone, watch out. Now, I am not making excuses here for bad behavior. That's not what I'm talking about. Right? Bad behavior still needs to be dealt with. It needs to be punished under the law for the macro's sake and so on and so forth. But what this is doing is giving us insight into how God views us, how God loves us even though we are bisha, because we all are bisha at some level. At some level, we still don't know what we're doing. There are always more layers to reclaiming our awareness. And so if this is how God views us, how will that help us to view others and be able to deal with the difficult people in our lives, to be able to deal with the heinous people in our lives, whether they're directly in our lives or something that we read on the news? How do we deal with that? How do we come back to center? How do we come back to ground? How do we stay balanced when everything seems so out of balance? This is how. It's bisha. They don't know what they're doing. Years ago, I was asked by a woman to visit her son who had been popped for heroin production and use and so on and so forth, distributing. And he was in the OC Central Jail. And so you go through this whole rigmarole to get in there, and you go into this little long corridor, glass on both sides. And so on the other sides of the glass are all the orange jumpsuits, right? And then inside is the people that are visiting them. And so you go in and you sit down in front of a window and you wait. And you could be waiting for half an hour because prison time has nothing to do with your schedule, in case you didn't know that. But as I was waiting for my orange jumpsuit to come up so that I could talk to him, I was just turning and looking around at all the people. And a couple of windows down, there was a woman who was looking across at a young man in his orange jumpsuit. And as I was watching her and watching them talk, as I was watching her lean into the conversation and her body language, and I couldn't hear the words, but just the tone of voice, I realized she could have been sitting across a candlelit, white tablecloth, beautiful restaurant over a wonderful meal, just talking to her man. It made no difference that she was talking through glass on a handset to the orange jumpsuit. And I realized she's completely orange colorblind. She doesn't see it. All she sees is her man, and she still loves him. And if there was any incentive for that young man to get his stuff together and get out of there, that was it, right on the other side of the glass. But as I was thinking about that, I realized God is orange colorblind too, in our favor. This is what Taba and Bisha can help us to understand. How God can love us when we are unlovely. How does that work? This is what we're trying to get across. This is what Jesus is trying to get across. God sees us on a continuum from unripe to ripe, and always sees the unformed potential in us, even when we can't see it. When we can't see it in another, God still sees it, still loves despite, and is patient through the process. You might have to go to prison, but the process continues. The unformed potential is still there. We always have the option to be who we were created to be. So how does this change the way that we read our scriptures? Because it will. If you actually substitute these understandings of these two words into the scriptures, it changes everything about the way that we read them. Now we start to get the kind of context where they can speak to us and not just reinforce the preconceived beliefs that we already have. Reinforce the categories that we continue to put people and things into. Let's take a look at a couple of them. Look at Matthew 7, starting at verse 15. Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then you will know them by their fruits. All right, so when we read something like that and we've got those preconceived, dualistic, moralistic, good and bad definitions ringing in our head, we're thinking along those lines. That there are people, there are trees, and if they are producing something that is bad, legally bad, unlawful, whatever, then they're going to be cut down and thrown into the fire, which we're going to equate with hell, and we're off to the races, right? But let's assume that we can put in the place Taba and Bisha, because those are the words in Aramaic that have been translated into good and bad. If you read it in Aramaic, it's going to be Taba and Bisha. Substituting those understandings, let's take a look at the little paraphrase there that I did. This will start at verse 17. Every mature tree, right? Not good tree. Every mature tree bears ripe or beautiful fruit. But the tree that is not ready bears unripe fruit. A tree that is ready cannot produce inedible fruit, nor can a tree that is not ready produce edible fruit. Every tree that does not bear edible fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Now, how does that change the understanding? Because right off, there are no value judgments here, are there? There are only statements of fact, right? The trees are ripe, edible, or functional. The fruit is ripe, edible, or functional, or not. Something is good, if it has the capacity to preserve and to nurture life, if it has the capacity to fill the intended function. And if not, it's Bisha. It's just not ready. These are the facts we need to know. These are the facts we need to discern about things around us. We need that everything that we experience, right? Discerned, not judged. But it changes the way that we approach things. It is just a statement of fact. This person is not ready to have a relationship with. This person is not mature enough to be trusted with whatever. We can make those discernments once we have experienced the person, but then we see the unformed potential in them, which always leaves the door open, because people can change. And we will rediscern that at the appropriate time. Take a look at Matthew, just continuing on, verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. And many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. What is Jesus saying the Father is saying? Not what we think when we look at it legally. He is saying that behavior, your good behavior, your prophetic behavior, your miraculous behavior, has nothing to do with acceptability. Has nothing to do with God's love and God's connection to you. You think that's all about performance, right? It's all about reward and punishment. It has nothing to do with that. The question really is whether you have become a person who is ready and mature enough to be vulnerable enough to be intimate, to actually have relationship, to be able to spend the time in that kind of relationship with that humility and that vulnerability. It's not about the performance. Whatever performance you have will come out of that intimacy. It doesn't define it. We have to be vulnerable. And if we are not intimate with God, then he never knew us. It's just a statement of fact. It's not that God is keeping anybody out of anything, withholding anything. It's just a statement of fact. You can't even see what is right in front of you. You can't even see the nature of the relationship that you can have with me and with everyone else. You are keeping yourself out, shelved off behind the glass because you're not ready yet. But you can be, and you will be at some point. This is what's going on here. Good behavior and obedience is no substitute ever for the intimacy of real relationship. Because before you're ready, you cannot see it. You cannot see God or love. And then beyond that, how about the word for lawless down there? Depart from me, all you who practice lawlessness. That word is not bisha. That word is aula. And it means iniquity, and it means wickedness, and it can mean lawlessness, of course. It's translated correctly. But if you go into an Aramaic lexicon and you look up that word, as I did, the first entry was a baby or a suckling infant. And I thought that I must have took a left turn at Albuquerque. What the heck was I doing on this particular entry, right? Now, it wasn't the same word. It's ula. But it shares the same roots with aula, and it was listed in a line with that same word that I looked up. And what was the second entry? It was a colt, a foal, right? Ila. Same roots. So a baby, a suckling infant, a colt, and one who practices lawlessness or a wicked. What in the world is the connection between all of those? They're all immature. They're all unready. They're all unripe. They're all unable to fulfill their ultimate purpose. Therefore, in the Semitic mind, in the Aramaic mind, they are the same. If we could get that, it would make so much difference for us. That is the primary meaning. That's the primary understanding here. Not that they were lawless against some code, but they're not ready to see the goodness that would then flow out of them in lawful behavior, acceptable behavior. Take a look at Matthew 5, verse 48. Therefore you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. What in the heck is he talking about there? You know, a line like that in our Western perfectionistic culture is going to fill us with all sorts of dread, or it's just going to sail right over our heads, because there's no way that Jesus could be speaking literally here. No way that we can really be perfect as God in heaven is perfect. Are you kidding me? What in the heck, right? But the truth is, Jesus is being very literal here. It's that our translation gets in the way. Gamira is the word that he uses here. Gamira can mean perfect, obviously, but it means perfect not in the sense that it is without error, not perfectionistic, but complete, whole, mature, ready, fulfilled, ripe. It keeps coming back. In the Semitic mind, anything that is good, anything that is blessed, anything that is perfect is going to have those same qualities, because that is the highest goodness in their lives. It's what sustains their lives, right? And what Jesus is saying is, yes, we can be as ripe as the Father is in any given moment. We can see the goodness of unity. We can see the goodness of relationship. We can see how we are already one with each other. And we can also make mistakes at the same time. Jesus in the carpenter shop, I'm sure he cut a board to the wrong length and ruined the lumber, got in trouble from his father. But he was still Gamira. He was still perfect in the unity and the connection. So we can make mistakes, and we can fall short at any given moment and still be Gamira, still be perfect, still be Taba, still be good, still be in love with life and in love with unity. This is the paradox that we've got to navigate through without resolving one side or another. Keep it in that non-dual space. Bring the two together. That's where we learn that friction point. So if we can start to see good and evil as a continuum of functionality, a continuum of functionality, not a code, not a standard, not a dualistic set. If we can do that, we are taking our first step away from judgment, our first step away from objectifying, first step away from separating ourselves from everything around us. A continuum of functionality, right? It's the first step toward reclaiming our awareness of the oneness that is the basic reality of life, both within ourselves and among our relationships with others, to begin to see everything in its appointed time, sneaking into place. The good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, it has its appointed time. We accept the flow of life. We accept the unfolding of life instead of judging it good or bad against our agenda at every point, and either enjoying it or not enjoying it based on those labels. We'll be able to see everything in life, all the events, all the people, moving through all possible states of awareness themselves. And if we can do that, then we can keep moving through all our possible states of awareness at the same time and not get stuck along the continuum someplace, like so many of us do. We get stuck. We think we're finished. We think we're done. We think this is the place we're supposed to be. Because to judge is to take a snapshot of a moment and judge it and put it on the shelf. It's no longer motion. It's no longer moving. It's no longer alive. Why do you look for the living among the dead? It's not going to be here in the graveyard. It's not going to be here in the snapshot you take in your mind. It's going to be in the rhythms of life and nature. To judge is to take that snapshot, to categorize and hold it in suspension, which then categorizes us, holds us in suspension, out of the motion of the Spirit, separate from, objectifying, keeping ourselves in the illusion that everything is so, dualistic, separate, in competition with. When we become aware of everything in its time, then we can start to reclaim our wholeness. We can start to fulfill our purpose. And yes, that doesn't mean that we don't work against the effects of Bisha behavior and Bisha action, the bad action. Yes, we're going to protest, and we're going to prosecute, and we're going to reform. We have to do that. We need to take our communities seriously. We want to work for them to be as good as they can be, but not at the expense of still seeing the goodness in each moment. But if we can do that protesting and that prosecuting and that reforming, still hanging on to the attitude of Jesus, of this patient gardener, forgive them, Father, they don't know what they're doing, then we can continue to see the potential ripeness in every seed that we encounter along the way. And that will keep us from stalling out on our continuum. That will keep us from becoming static, becoming stuck interiorly, unaware. Unaware as much as we would judge all of those that we term and deem unaware. God sees the perfection in every seed. He loves us for it as his seeds. And the only way that we're ever going to be able to love as God loves is if we can start seeing life and everyone and everything in it in the same way. A continuum of functionality is what's going to allow us to reclaim our awareness and see the unity in everything that we have previously judged to be evil, good, or somewhere in between. This is where Jesus is trying to take us. Let's assent. Let's lean in and see what we can do. And let's pray. Father, thank you for loving us. We say it over and over again. Help us to see through this particular lens that it really is possible for you to love us. And not only to love us, but to actually like us, to enjoy our company, even when we think we are the last ones that anyone would want to be around. Help us to stop judging ourselves so harshly as we judge others. Help us to stop seeing in terms of judgment at all and just see the potential. See how we are all moving along this line to you, becoming more and more somebody who can apprehend your love. That's what we're after, Father. Help us to do that. Help us to do whatever we need to do to begin to let go of the things that are keeping us from you and each other. And never let us forget that we can only do any of this. We can only love because you loved us first. And we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand.